the smell hits first. Smoke, thick, choking smoke that stings the eyes and burns the lungs. A woman runs through narrow stone corridors, her bare feet slapping against cold marble floors. Behind her, screaming, always screaming, she clutches a golden artifact against her chest, something ancient, something sacred. Her breath comes in ragged gasps. Then she hears it. Footsteps, heavy boots, dozens of them, getting closer. She turns a corner and freezes. At the end of the hallway stands a man in armor, sword drawn, face hidden behind a steel mask. Behind him, flames dance across tapestries that have hung in this palace for 300 years. He takes one step forward. She takes one step back. And in that moment, an entire civilization begins to die. This isn't a movie. This is Timbuktu, 1591. For centuries, this city was the intellectual capital of the world. While Europe stumbled through the Dark Ages, Timbuktu had universities, hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, scholars from 3 continents. The woman running through those corridors? She's trying to save what she can. Because outside these walls, an army has arrived with one purpose: total erasure. But here's what they never told you in school. Timbuktu was just one of 7 black civilizations that reached heights most people can't even imagine today. 7 societies that built empires, discovered scientific principles, created art that would make modern museums weep. And all 7 were systematically destroyed. Not by natural disasters, not by disease, not by inevitable decline, by deliberate, calculated destruction. And the worst part? Most people have never heard their names. Because after these civilizations were burned to the ground, something even more sinister happened. Their stories were erased. Their achievements were stolen. Their very existence was questioned. You're about to discover 7 lost worlds, 7 tragedies, and one disturbing pattern that connects them all. This is going to make you angry. Chapter 1. The Kingdom of Kush. Picture this. It's 700 BCE. While Rome is still a collection of mud huts, there's a kingdom in northeast Africa that's building pyramids that would make Egypt jealous. The Kingdom of Kush. Most people have never heard of it, but for over 1,000 years, this civilization was a superpower. They didn't just exist alongside ancient Egypt. They conquered Egypt. The 25th dynasty of Egypt? Those were Kushite pharaohs, black African kings who ruled one of the greatest empires the world had ever seen. They built over 200 pyramids, more than Egypt. Let that sink in. The Kushites developed their own writing system, Meroitic script. They mastered ironworking before most of Europe knew what iron was. Their capital city, Meroe, was an industrial center with massive smelting furnaces. Archaeologists call it the Birmingham of ancient Africa. Their queens, the Kandakes, were warrior rulers who commanded armies and negotiated with Rome as equals. One Kandake, Amanirenas, actually fought the Roman Empire to a standstill. She lost an eye in battle, and when Rome sent their best general, she defeated him so thoroughly that Augustus Caesar had to negotiate a peace treaty. Rome negotiated with Kush. This wasn't some primitive tribe. This was a sophisticated civilization with international trade networks, monumental architecture, and military might that made superpowers think twice. The tragedy. So what happened? Here's where the story gets dark. Around 350 CE, the kingdom of Aksum, another African power, invaded Kush. But it wasn't just a military conquest. It was cultural annihilation. The Aksumites were recent converts to Christianity, and they saw the Kushites as pagans who needed to be civilized. They burned cities, destroyed temples, smashed monuments. But that was just the beginning. When European colonizers arrived centuries later, they found these pyramids, these ruins, these incredible achievements, and they refused to believe Africans built them. They literally invented theories that anyone else, Egyptians, Phoenicians, even aliens, must have built these structures. The idea that black Africans could create something so magnificent was, to them, impossible. In the 1800s, European explorers dynamited Kushite pyramids looking for treasure. They carted off artifacts to museums in London and Berlin, where they were labeled as Egyptian or Oriental, anything but African. The final insult? Modern history books barely mention Kush at all. Most people graduate high school having never heard the name. A civilization that lasted over 1,000 years, that conquered Egypt, that fought Rome to a standstill, reduced to a footnote, if that. This is Erasure. Chapter 2. The Kingdom of Aksum. Now, let's talk about the civilization that conquered Kush. Because karma has a cruel sense of irony. The kingdom of Aksum, located in modern-day Ethiopia and Eritrea, was one of the four great powers of the ancient world, alongside Rome, Persia, and China. 4th century scholars actually listed it that way: Rome, Persia, China, Aksum. Think about that. Aksum controlled massive trade routes between Africa, Arabia, and India. They minted their own currency, something only the most sophisticated economies did. Their gold, silver, and bronze coins have been found as far away as India and Afghanistan. They built towering obelisks, some over 80 feet tall, carved from single pieces of granite. The engineering precision required to cut, transport, and erect these monuments rivals anything built in ancient Rome. The tallest one, the obelisk of Aksum, stood for over 1,700 years. Aksum was also one of the first Christian kingdoms in the world, converting in 333 CE, before most of Europe. Their king, Ezana, was as powerful as any Roman emperor. They had their own written language, Giddels, which is still used in Ethiopian Orthodox churches today. They built massive underground tombs, palaces with sophisticated plumbing, and even had their own naval fleet that controlled the Red Sea. The tragedy. So what destroyed this powerhouse? Islam's expansion in the 7th century isolated Aksum from its trading partners. But that's not what killed it. What killed it was systematic starvation through economic warfare. Muslim-controlled regions cut off Aksum's access to Mediterranean trade routes. Without trade, the economy collapsed. Without an economy, the military crumbled. Without a military, the kingdom splintered. By the 10th century, Aksum was abandoned. But here's where it gets sinister. For centuries, European historians claimed Aksum was actually an Arabian civilization, or a Semitic outpost, anything to avoid calling it an African achievement. Even though Aksum was in Africa, even though most of its population was African, even though its culture was distinctly African. The logic: advanced civilization plus Africa equals does not compute. Italian fascists actually invaded Ethiopia in 1935, partially based on the racist belief that Ethiopians couldn't possibly have built such great monuments and needed European guidance. During the occupation, Italian soldiers stole the obelisk of Axum, broke it into pieces, and shipped it to Rome, where it stood in front of the United Nations building like a trophy of conquest. It took until 2005 for Italy to return it. 70 years they kept it. And the story of Axum's greatness, still barely taught, still overshadowed, still erased. You seeing the pattern yet?
Civilization rises. Civilization thrives. Civilization gets destroyed. Then its destroyers write the history books. And suddenly the civilization never existed, or wasn't that impressive, or must have had outside help. It's not just conquest, it's memory murder. Chapter 3. The Great Zimbabwe. Let's jump forward to medieval Africa. 11th century, Southern Africa. While Europe was building wooden castles, there was a civilization in modern-day Zimbabwe building stone monuments so impressive that when Europeans first saw them in the 1800s, they lost their minds. The Great Zimbabwe. Massive stone walls, some 36 feet high and 20 feet thick, built without mortar. Not a single drop of cement, just precisely cut granite blocks fitted together with mathematical precision. The Great Enclosure, the largest ancient structure south of the Sahara, has walls that run for over 800 feet and contain approximately 1 million stone blocks. This wasn't a fortress, this was a capital city, the center of a vast trading empire that stretched from the Zambezi River to the Indian Ocean. They traded gold, ivory, and copper with merchants from Arabia, Persia, India, and China. Archaeologists have found Chinese pottery, Persian glass, and Arabian coins in the ruins. The civilization had a population estimated at 18,000 people, a massive city by medieval standards. They had sophisticated agriculture, cattle herding, and mining operations that extracted gold from hundreds of mines across the region. Their artists created intricate soapstone carvings, including the famous Zimbabwe birds, national symbols of modern Zimbabwe. This was wealth. This was power. This was sophistication. The tragedy. When European colonizers arrived in the late 1800s, they saw these ruins and immediately decided Africans couldn't have built this. Not probably didn't, decided as fact. British colonizers invented theories that Phoenicians built it, that Arabs built it, that the Queen of Sheba built it, that a lost white civilization built it. Anything, literally anything except the truth. The racist ideology was so strong that the Rhodesian government, the white minority regime that controlled the area, made it illegal to suggest that black Africans built Great Zimbabwe. Illegal. Archaeologists who published findings proving African origins were censored, fired, or exiled. Books were banned. Research was suppressed. One archaeologist, Peter Garlake, was forced to leave the country in 1970 because his research proved what was obvious. Black Africans built Great Zimbabwe. The government hired archaeologists whose job was to prove that anyone but Africans built the city. They removed artifacts that contradicted the white origin theory. They destroyed layers of evidence. This wasn't ancient history, this was the 1970s. Even today, some fringe groups still push these racist theories, despite overwhelming archaeological evidence. The name Zimbabwe itself was banned during colonial rule. The colonizers called the area Rhodesia, named after British imperialist Cecil Rhodes. When the country gained independence in 1980, they reclaimed the name Zimbabwe, a direct reference to the Great Zimbabwe, the civilization their ancestors built, the civilization the world tried to say never existed. That's how deep the erasure went. Chapter 4. The Songhai Empire. Now, let's return to West Africa, 15th and 16th centuries, the Songhai Empire. At its height, this was one of the largest empires in African history, larger than Western Europe. It stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the borders of modern-day Nigeria. The capital Gao was a metropolis. The legendary city of Timbuktu, yes, that Timbuktu, was part of the Songhai Empire. And Timbuktu wasn't some backwater. It was the intellectual center of the Islamic world. The University of Sankore in Timbuktu had one of the largest libraries in the world. We're talking about 400,000 to 700,000 manuscripts, books on astronomy, medicine, mathematics, law, poetry, philosophy. Scholars traveled from Baghdad, Cairo, and Mecca to study in Timbuktu. Let me repeat that. People from the Middle East traveled to Africa to get educated. The Songhai had a professional army, a navy that patrolled the Niger River, a postal system, standardized weights and measures, and a taxation system that would make modern governments jealous. Their emperor Askia Mohammed organized the empire into provinces with governors, built schools and mosques, and established diplomatic relations with Morocco, Egypt, and the Ottoman Empire. This was peak civilization. The tragedy. Then came 1591. That scene from the beginning, that wasn't fiction. The Moroccan Sultan Ahmad al-Mansur wanted control of Songhai's gold mines, so he sent an army across the Sahara Desert, a military feat that seemed impossible. But this wasn't just any army. They had something Songhai didn't have: guns. The Battle of Tondabi was a massacre. The Songhai had superior numbers, around 40,000 soldiers against Morocco's 4,000. But the Moroccans had arquebuses, early firearms. The psychological impact was devastating. The Songhai had never seen or heard gunfire before. The noise, the smoke, the invisible death, it broke their lines. The Songhai military crumbled, but the Moroccans didn't just conquer, they destroyed. They burned libraries, they scattered scholars, they looted manuscripts and sold them as scrap paper in markets. Hundreds of thousands of irreplaceable texts, scientific treatises, historical records, mathematical proofs burned or disappeared. Some were used as wrapping paper for goods. Others were destroyed simply because the conquerors didn't understand their value. Imagine if the Library of Alexandria had been burned. Then, multiply that tragedy by 10. That's what happened to Timbuktu's libraries. And the world barely noticed. The cover-up. For centuries, European historians dismissed accounts of Timbuktu's greatness as exaggerations or myths. When European explorers finally reached Timbuktu in the 1800s, they found a city in decline and declared, "See, it never was that great, just African legends." They conveniently ignored that the city had been in ruins for 200 years because of the Moroccan invasion. It wasn't until the 1970s, that scholars began serious efforts to preserve what manuscripts remain. Today, families in Timbuktu still hide ancient manuscripts in secret rooms and buried chests, terrified that extremists or looters will destroy what little remains. In 2012, Al-Qaeda-linked militants occupied Timbuktu and burned the Ahmed Baba Institute, destroying thousands of manuscripts. The erasure continues. 4 civilizations down. Everyone destroyed. Everyone erased. Everyone dismissed as not that advanced or not really African or probably didn't exist. You starting to feel the rage yet? Because we're only halfway. And the next 3, they're gonna hurt even more. Chapter 5. The Kingdom of Congo. Central Africa. 14th century. The Kingdom of Congo was a sophisticated, centralized state with a population in the millions. Their capital, Mbanza, Congo, was one of the largest cities in the world, comparable to Lisbon or Amsterdam at the time. They had a complex government with a king, a council of advisors, provincial governors, and an organized legal system. They worked iron and copper. They wove raffia cloth so fine that early European traders compared it to velvet. They had currency. They had schools. When Portuguese explorers arrived in 1483, they were shocked. Here's what they didn't expect: diplomacy. The Kingdom of Congo didn't trade as inferiors. They traded as equals. The Congo king, Nzinga Ankuwu, corresponded with the king of Portugal as one monarch to another. His son, Afonso I, actually converted to Christianity and tried to build a partnership with Portugal based on mutual respect. He sent Congolese nobles to Lisbon to get European educations. He adopted Christianity not through conquest, but through choice. For decades, it seemed like a genuine alliance between equals. The tragedy. Then the Portuguese realized something. They could make more money selling Congo's people than trading with them. The Atlantic slave trade. At first, it was small scale, prisoners of war, criminals. But then, Portuguese traders wanted more, always more. They began bribing Congo officials, then destabilizing regions to create wars that would produce captives, then outright raiding. King Afonso I wrote desperate letters to the King of Portugal, begging him to stop the slave raids. We cannot reckon how great the damage is, since merchants daily seize our subjects, sons of the land and sons of our noblemen. They grab them and cause them to be sold, and so great, sir, is their corruption and licentiousness that our country is being utterly depopulated. Those weren't letters between strangers, these were allies, partners, Christians writing to Christians. The Portuguese king ignored him. The slave trade accelerated. Millions of Congolese people were kidnapped and shipped across the Atlantic. Families destroyed, communities shattered.
The kingdom tried to fight back, but how do you fight an enemy that profits from your destruction? An enemy that has guns, ships, and the backing of European superpowers? By the 1600s, the Kingdom of Congo was fractured. Civil wars, often funded by Portuguese and Dutch slave traders, tore it apart. In 1665, Portuguese forces killed the Congo king in battle. They took his head as a trophy. The kingdom limped on for another century, but it was a shell, a ghost. By the 1800s, when Belgium's King Leopold II colonized the region, no one even remembered that Congo had been a powerful, sophisticated kingdom. Instead, Leopold and other Europeans called it the Dark Continent, inhabited by savages who needed civilization. They built their racist ideology on amnesia, on the deliberate forgetting of what Congo once was. The ultimate insult. And here's the sickest part. European historians spent centuries arguing that African kingdoms couldn't have organized the slave trade themselves, so Europeans must have brought civilization to Africa. But the Kingdom of Congo proves the opposite. They had civilization. Europeans destroyed it to fuel the slave trade. The proof is in the letters, in the ruins, in the archaeological record. But how many people learn about this in school? Chapter 6. The Land of Punt. Let's go way back. Ancient history. Bronze Age. Ancient Egyptians wrote about a place they called Tad Netcher, the land of the gods. In Greek, it was called Punt. For over 1,000 years, Egypt traded with Punt. They called it the land of riches, gold, ebony, myrrh, frankincense, exotic animals. Egyptian murals show elaborate trade expeditions. Queen Hatshepsut sent a massive fleet to Punt around 1470 BCE. The scenes carved into her temple show Puntite houses built on stilts, tropical vegetation, and people who looked distinctly African. Egypt called Punt God's land not because it was mythical, but because it was paradise, a place of wealth and wonder. Scholars believe Punt was located somewhere in the Horn of Africa, modern-day Somalia, Djibouti, or Eritrea. But here's the thing, Punt wasn't just a trading partner. Evidence suggests it was a sophisticated society in its own right. They had organized trade networks, seafaring capability, and goods that were prized across the ancient world. The tragedy. So what happened? Punt vanished. Not gradually, not slowly, it just disappeared from history. After 1000 BCE, Egyptian records stop mentioning Punt. No more trade expeditions. No more murals. No more stories. Why? We don't know. Some scholars think environmental change destroyed the region. Others think political upheaval. Still others think invasion. But the real tragedy isn't that Punt disappeared, it's what happened next. For centuries, European archaeologists claimed Punt never existed. They called it Egyptian mythology, a legend, a made-up place like Atlantis. They had murals, they had trade records, they had actual receipts of goods from Punt. But because they couldn't find Punt's ruins, because the civilization had been so thoroughly erased, they decided it must have been fiction. Even when scholars argued that Punt was probably in Africa, the racist assumption kicked in. Africans couldn't have built a civilization impressive enough to trade with Egypt, so they invented theories that Punt was in Arabia, or India, or even Yemen, anywhere but Black Africa. It wasn't until the late 20th century that genetic studies and archaeological evidence confirmed Punt was almost certainly in the Horn of Africa. It was an African civilization. But by then, generations of people had grown up believing it was a myth. The pattern. You see it now, right? The pattern isn't just destruction, it's denial. Even when evidence surfaces, murals, trade records, archaeological sites, if a civilization was African, scholars bend over backwards to claim it was anything else. And when a civilization disappears so completely that no ruins remain, they say it never existed at all. That's not history, that's erasure. Chapter 7. The Nubian Kingdoms. Last one, and it's going to hurt the most. Nubia, the land south of Egypt, in modern-day Sudan. For over 3,000 years, Nubian kingdoms thrived. They weren't satellites of Egypt, they were rivals, sometimes enemies, sometimes conquerors. We already talked about Kush, but Nubia was bigger than Kush. It was a collection of kingdoms, Kerma, Napata, Meroe, that rose and fell across millennia. The Nubians built pyramids before Egypt did. They developed their own writing systems, plural. They mined gold that made them the wealthiest region in the ancient world. When Egypt grew weak, Nubia grew strong. When Nubia grew weak, Egypt invaded. This went back and forth for centuries. Nubian pharaohs ruled Egypt, Egyptian pharaohs conquered Nubia. Then Nubia rose again. The Nubians were master archers, so feared that the Egyptian hieroglyph for Nubia was a bow and arrow. They built temples that rival anything in Egypt. The Temple of Amun at Jebel Barkal is as magnificent as anything at Karnak or Luxor. They had queens, Candaces, who led armies into battle. They had universities, trade networks, and art that influenced cultures from Greece to Persia. The tragedy. So what destroyed them? Egypt, Rome, Persia, Christianity, Islam. Take your pick. Every superpower that rose in North Africa or the Middle East took a swing at Nubia. Egypt invaded repeatedly, plundering gold, enslaving people, burning cities. When Rome conquered Egypt, they attacked Nubia too. One Roman general bragged about enslaving 30,000 Nubians in one campaign. When Christianity spread, it reached Nubia, but Christian Nubia was eventually destroyed by Muslim invasions from Egypt. Then centuries later, Ottoman Turks swept through, scattering what remained. But the final blow, colonialism. When British and French colonizers carved up Africa in the 1800s, they literally divided Nubia in half. The border between Egypt and Sudan was drawn right through the heart of ancient Nubia. Families separated. Sacred sites split between countries. A 3,000-year-old civilization erased by a line on a map.
the ultimate erasure. In the 1960s, Egypt built the Aswan High Dam. It was supposed to be progress, electricity, economic growth, modernization. But the dam flooded the Nile Valley, the heart of ancient Nubia. Thousands of Nubians were forcibly relocated, entire villages disappeared underwater, and with them countless archaeological sites, temples, tombs, settlements were lost forever. UNESCO launched a rescue mission, saving a few monuments like Abu Simbel, but most of Nubia, gone, submerged. Imagine if someone flooded the Nile Valley and drowned all of ancient Egypt. That's what happened to Nubia. And the world barely protested, because Nubia was African, and African civilizations, in the eyes of the world, were disposable. The silence. Most people have never heard of Nubia. If they have, they think it was part of Egypt or not really important. The truth is, Nubia was as old as Egypt, as rich as Egypt, as powerful as Egypt. But Egypt was on the Mediterranean. Egypt dealt with Greece and Rome. So Egypt got to be the cradle of civilization. And Nubia got forgotten. So, let's lay it out. 7 civilizations, 7 tragedies. But it's not just that they were destroyed. Every civilization gets destroyed eventually. Rome fell, Greece fell, the Mongols, the Ottomans, the Mayans, all gone. But those civilizations are taught in schools, celebrated, remembered. These 7 African civilizations? Buried, dismissed, denied. And it's not an accident. The 3 stages of erasure. Stage 1, physical destruction. Burn the libraries, destroy the monuments, kill the scholars, enslave the population. Make sure nothing remains. Stage 2, historical denial. When evidence surfaces, claim it was built by anyone else. Arabs, Europeans, aliens, anyone but Africans. Make sure the achievement is stolen. Stage 3, educational erasure. Don't teach it in schools. Don't include it in textbooks. Don't make documentaries about it. Make sure the memory dies. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is documented fact. Rhodesian censorship of great Zimbabwe research? Documented. European claims that Arabs built African monuments? Documented. The destruction of Timbuktu's libraries? Documented. The flooding of Nubia? Documented. This happened. It's still happening. Why? Because if people knew that Africa had great civilizations, civilizations that rivaled or surpassed Europe, it destroys the entire justification for colonialism. The whole colonial project was built on a lie. Africans are primitive. They need us to civilize them. But if Africans built empires, universities, and monuments that Europeans couldn't match, if Africans had written books while Europeans were illiterate, if Africans had defeated Rome while Europe was a collection of tribes, then the lie collapses. So the history had to be erased, the evidence had to be hidden, the truth had to be buried. Because if people knew the truth, they'd ask uncomfortable questions. Why did we colonize Africa? Why did we enslave millions? Why do we still treat Africa as inferior? And the only honest answer is racism. Pure, deliberate, systematic racism. This isn't ancient history. The consequences of this erasure are happening right now. When African countries struggle with poverty, instability, or corruption, people say, "See, Africans can't govern themselves." They ignore that European colonizers deliberately destroyed stable kingdoms, drew random borders that split ethnic groups, and looted resources for centuries. When people mock African culture or call Africa uncivilized, they're standing on the graves of civilizations they've never heard of.
When textbooks teach ancient history as Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, Rome, and skip Africa entirely, they're continuing the erasure. When museums in London, Paris, and Berlin display African artifacts stolen during colonial conquests, they're profiting from destruction. The British Museum has Benin bronzes stolen during the 1897 British invasion of Benin, when soldiers burned the city and slaughtered thousands. The Museum of Natural History in New York has Zimbabwe artifacts taken during colonial rule. These aren't acquisitions, they're trophies of genocide. The resistance. But here's the thing. Despite everything, despite centuries of destruction, denial, and erasure, the truth is coming out. Archaeologists are rediscovering lost cities. Scholars are translating ancient manuscripts. Communities are preserving what remains. In Timbuktu, families are digitizing manuscripts, hiding them from extremists, and sharing them with the world. In Zimbabwe, people are reclaiming their history and teaching the truth about Great Zimbabwe. In Sudan, archaeologists are racing to document Nubian sites before they're lost forever. The truth is resilient. It survives. It fights back. And now, with the internet, the truth is spreading faster than the lies can keep up. You're watching this video. That's resistance. You're learning what they didn't want you to know. 7 civilizations. The kingdom of Kush, erased and denied. The kingdom of Aksum, isolated and forgotten. Great Zimbabwe, stolen and suppressed. The Songhai Empire, burned and buried. The kingdom of Congo, enslaved and shattered. The land of Punt, dismissed as myth. The Nubian kingdoms, drowned and divided. Every one destroyed by deliberate violence. Every one erased by deliberate lies. And the saddest part? These are just 7. There are more, dozens more. Kingdoms, empires, societies that rose and fell across Africa, their stories lost to time and racism. But here's what they couldn't erase. The monuments still stand. Pyramids in Sudan, walls in Zimbabwe, obelisks in Ethiopia. The manuscripts still exist, hidden in private libraries, preserved by families, digitized by scholars. And the DNA still carries the truth. Genetic studies tracing ancient migrations, proving connections, confirming histories. And the people remember. Not in textbooks, not in museums, but in stories passed down through generations. In pride that couldn't be killed, in determination to reclaim what was stolen. And the final truth? You want to know the real tragedy? It's not that these civilizations fell. Every civilization falls eventually. The tragedy is that they were erased, destroyed twice, once by violence and once by lies. But erasure only works if we let it. So share this story, tell someone, teach someone. Because every time someone learns the truth, the erasure fails a little more. Every time someone says, "I didn't know that," that's a crack in the wall. And eventually, the wall falls. These 7 civilizations were destroyed, but their stories survived. And now you know. Now you carry their memory. Now you're part of the resistance against erasure. So here's the question. What are you going to do with this knowledge? Are you going to forget it, or are you going to share it? Because the only way we honor these lost civilizations is by making sure they're never forgotten again. History tried to bury them. We're digging them back up. If this opened your eyes, share it. If it made you angry, share it. If it made you think, share it. Because the truth doesn't spread itself. We do.